I think I know Courtney and I have heard her do classes before. Um, I think it's always helpful for me and probably maybe some of you too to have some little hints of how to be positively engaged and have their attention, children's attention, while you at the same time um, maintain the discipline. Because I think it the reality is that kids nowadays respond very differently than they used to, and they're very active and they are everything happens very fast, as their reality is. So that would be something I would love to hear.
Tricky balance, isn't it? Especially in a setting of a faith community, because it's not like a school where there are some certain consequences to behaviors or actions, or there are grades, right? So it's a little bit different, that interaction for sure. Yeah, absolutely. So just fair warning, I am taking what is typically an hour and a half presentation and just kind of hitting some of the high points today. So, I welcome questions all the way through. I will ask for some interaction. If you're not comfortable in muting yourself, I totally get it. So you are more than welcome to type in the chat or the Q&A box or whatever makes you most comfortable as we go through. So if you think of things as we're going through, please, like super informal, interrupt me, ask your questions, because I really do want this to meet your needs. So I'm showing you this slide right now. This is just our slide that basically says our programs are open to everyone without regard to any of these qualities listed here. So if anyone ever needed any accommodations to attend our programming, we would provide those. And it's kind of what you were saying, Susan, really, our goal with children, we want to create this healthy, stress-free environment for them and for us, right? So we want this to be a good experience for everyone. And I'm going to just say there is not one right way to do this. You all have different styles of interacting with children, and that's okay. There's more than one right way. But what we do is we try to find research-backed tools and strategies that kind of have some meat behind them, that have been proven, and just to provide you more ideas and tools for your toolbox. So we're going to talk a little bit about this idea of what promotes positive discipline, self-discipline. What do we mean by positive discipline? And talk about our role in creating that environment and specific strategies that we can use. So I do see in the chat, we have a couple of thoughts here. So what could be helpful for me is strategies for being patient. Yes. And it's funny, I often talk with parents and caregivers and teachers about just this whole idea of pressing pause, right? And so at the end here, we are going to talk about kind of our role and us as a role model and sort of checking in with ourselves. And those might be some strategies for being patient. So I'm glad you put that there, because I can spend a little bit of time on that. I actually, in one of my other classes, spend quite a bit of time on talking with adults about their mindset to help us like, take that breath and stay calm. Strategies for neurodivergent kids in a big group setting. And I'm just going to be completely honest with you, that's tough, right? Because we know that neurodivergent kids are often have in addition to their neurodivergence, also have some sensory integration disorders as well. And so those types of environments can really be overwhelming. Too much noise, too much light, too much, right? And so sometimes the large group setting is not always the best place for those kids. And sometimes we need, if we can, to have either an adult who can be with those kids, or a volunteer who can be with those kids, or partnering them up with a buddy, or finding a safe space that they can be, and kind of making that acceptable and okay, that they can have their own sort of space to be something that helps them calm down. Because just kind of battling the neurodivergence and saying, well, this is our only option, we're in this group setting, so here we go, is really going to be tough for everyone every time, right? So I don't get a ton into neurodivergence here, so I wanted to make sure I address that sort of right away. This is a conversation with the parents and the child to say, how can we make this successful for everyone? And I know because I did work in a church setting how hard that can be, especially with a shortage of adults sometimes, and people to sort of be with those kiddos. And sometimes you can get like I say, an older child or even just another child who's a calming presence. Some kids react really well to some other children, and that can be helpful as well. Okay, so in this presentation, and I will try to bring up strategies as we go as well. But in this presentation, we have pictures to represent each one of the concepts. If we were doing the full presentation, we would have 9 pictures. And what we ask people to do is kind of draw a little picture to represent each of the concepts I talk about to help you remember it. And so totally optional for you, but if you want to, you can do that. And if you choose to do that, your first picture would be a pair of scissors. So you can doodle while I talk. And I'm just going to tell you a little story in my shortened version of this presentation that happened for me when I was teaching with a couple of children in a pair of scissors. So when I was teaching in early childhood, I had like a writing center set up, and I had a couple of girls at this writing center. They were about 4 years old. And at this writing center, I had some scissors, I had paper, pencils, envelopes, tickets, restaurant ordering pads. We had all the stuff so that kids could just go over there and they could write and practice all of those skills. And these 2 girls that were at the writing center were really very good friends and kind of the easy kids of the class, right? The ones I didn't have to worry about so much. And then lo and behold, one day they're at the writing center, and one girl actually has this big blonde curly hair. The other girl had this straighter brown hair. The girl with the straighter brown hair took a pair of scissors, reached over to the girl with the curly blonde hair, and you can imagine what happened next. Cut a lock of her hair off. So let me just say, first of all, how fast this happens when you're the adult. Like, you see it happening and it's like over before you even have a moment to breathe or say anything. And then you're thinking, okay, so how am I going to tell the parents that, their child just got a haircut at school? I mean, it's not even like it was chaos in the classroom. It just happened quickly. So in that moment, or any moment when children do something that makes us go, oh, right, that's not okay, right? What we're going to talk about, this kind of ties into patience, is our very first step needs to be to press pause, right? To take that deep breath, but to get curious. And so in that moment, I was able, because I knew this are rule following kids, right? Good friends. And I said to the one girl who took the scissors, and I was like, oh, scissors are not for cutting hair. Scissors are for cutting paper. So I dealt with the situation at hand. We're gonna just put the scissors down for a minute. And so tell me what you were thinking when you cut your friend's hair. And she looked at me as sweet as could be and said, well, she has too much hair, which I'm not going to argue with that. She may have, right? But okay. And so then, I'm trying to get curious, ask more questions, not like lose my mind here. And through some more talking with her and some confirming with her parent, it turns out that this girl's mom is a hairstylist and works out of her home. So when this child was not in my program, she was at home with her mom, watching people come in all the time because they had too much hair and they were getting their hair cut. And this was a favor that her mom was doing for them. And they were super grateful. In fact, they'd even pay her mom to do it. So in this child's mind, right, she was doing something very kind and loving for her friend with too much hair. So I'm going to ask you, why do you think I'm telling you this story? What do you think this might have to do with this topic of positive discipline and how we interact with children? What do you think?
The reaction we have, because what is in our mind is trying to take care of the action instead of being curious about, because there is a reasoning in the child's head. But
Yeah.
if we don't stop and pause, we go into the, moment of very fast trying to solve something that doesn't have any other solution besides being curious and not scaring the child away, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. So sometimes we don't even know what we're solving, right? Because we haven't stopped to hear the story and gather the information. So what we're talking about here is perception is reality, and for all of us, right? And so your perception as an adult is your reality, but that child's perception of what's happening, she had too much hair, that was her reality. And so in any situation, if we can pause and stop and gather information. Often children are not intentionally lying, they're just seeing things differently. They have their own perspective, their own side of the story. And so if we can stop and say to them, so tell me what you were thinking, or what happened before I got in the room, or what happened before I came over to you, or what happened before I saw you hit Johnny, right? And just take a minute to gather information and ask the question. What we're teaching children is that their perspective matters. We're teaching them also about being listeners to other people, about accepting other ideas and respecting others' perspectives. So before we even get into any specific strategies, we always start with this to remember this, right? To gather information and get our children's perspectives. Okay, so now our second picture. What do you think this picture, what does this make you think of when you see this picture? What word comes to mind?
She looks afraid.
She sure does. Yeah. So I just want you, if you're drawing, you could draw something that speaks fear to you, or that something that makes you, thinks of something to make you scared. Some people draw spiders. I don't know, whatever works for you. But something that says fear to you. And so, what I want to talk about on this slide is punishment versus discipline. And I want to separate out the meaning of those two words because sometimes we use them synonymously and they're not the same. So, the reason I have a fearful face here is because punishment controls children's behavior through fear. It's controlling their behavior by making them afraid of what will happen if they do a certain thing, right? And so if I'm trying to control a child's behavior through fear, I might say things like, I better not see you do that again. Or how many times have I told you not to talk like that? Um, my mom's favorite, don't you cry or I'll give you something to cry about, right? All of that is controlling behavior through fear. And in this situation, right, the adult is working to control the child. It seems expedient because I want to make that child afraid of what will happen. But the problem with this is it actually puts the responsibility back on us as the adult. Now I'm responsible for their behavior. Now I have to be policing them, right? I have to be catching them. I have to be giving them something to cry about. I better not see you do that again. And I don't want to put the responsibility back on us as the adult because I can't be all the time everywhere forever. I want to put the responsibility on the child. So when we control behavior through fear, the child's focus often just becomes, I'm not getting caught. Fine, you better not see me do that again. I'll make sure you don't see me do that again. Kids are savvy. They're really clever at playing the game in the system. And it's sort of like battle on, right? When we're using punishing behaviors. And here's the thing. Sometimes we use punishing threats or threats of punishment because it works. And it does work in the short term. To be fair, it does work in the short term. But building relationships with children and teaching children appropriate behaviors is not a short-term game. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And so in the long run, if we're trying to build the skills so children do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, then the short-term solution of punishment isn't going to help us meet that long-term goal. That child's just going to know, just don't do it if so-and-so is looking, right? It's all right as long as you don't get caught. That's what they're learning. They're not learning about actually modifying their behavior. Also, it destroys relationship. And we are all about building relationship. We just said in a faith community setting, I mean, that's all we've got to go on is our relationship, right? Because there's not really a consequence of grades or anything like that. So it can cause aggression and resentment and hurt between the adult and the child. And it's, again, not going to develop the child's own self-control. So if you're into drawing pictures, I'm going to have you draw a three-legged stool because the alternative to punishment then is what we call positive discipline. So this three-legged stool is made up of the leg of teaching, the leg of training, and the leg of guiding. So what happens with a three-legged stool if one of the legs breaks off? I mean,
Falls over.
sure does. Yep. Kind of an obvious question, right? It falls over. And so we want to think of positive discipline as a three-legged stool because it's not going to work unless you're using all three legs. And so the first leg of positive discipline is to teach our children in our care our expectations. We have to set up expectations for them. I know it seems like it should be obvious sometimes, but it isn't to them. And so we have to set up what the rules are or the expectations. The training leg is where then we are observing their behavior and we are actually following through consistently with the outcomes of them of when they either don't follow our rules or consistently following through with encouraging them when they do follow our rules, right? But we're observing their behavior and we're consistently following through with either positive or negative outcomes. The last leg is the guiding leg, and this is the leg we most often forget. And this is where we teach children the appropriate behavior we want them to do next time. So let me just give you a quick example. Let's say I had a rule for kids that were only to use crayons on paper. I'm just coming up with something simple. And you've got a kid who goes and takes the crayons and draws all over the wall. Okay, so first of all, I set up my expectations. I make sure they understand, right, that crayons are only used for paper. So then I'm observing their behavior. They just colored all over the wall. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that first picture of the scissors and I'm going to gather some information. And I'm going to say, hey, tell me what's going on because you just drew over the wall with some crayons. So tell me what's going on, right? So that child might say, I was mad. And so I drew on the wall, right? They might say, at my friend's house, they have the kind of crayons you can draw on the wall. They wash off. Or at my house, I have those crayons because they make those crayons, which is confusing, right? Or they might say, I wanted to draw up and down. I didn't want to draw flat on the table. I don't know. They might have their reason, but whatever it is, now I know what I'm dealing with, right? Because once I understand their reason, I know how to go from there. So I'm still going to follow through with the natural consequence of this, or the consequence I set up, which is if we draw on the walls with crayon, you have to help clean up the crayon. So I'm going to get out the cleaning supplies. The child's going to help clean up the crayon. Maybe they've lost the privilege of using the crayons for just for today, not forever, just for today, right? And we're going to just kind of figure this out. And now I'm going to get to the guiding piece. And I don't know how to guide the child if I didn't gather the information. But if the child said they were really mad, I'm going to teach them what to do with their mad. I'm going to teach them what's an appropriate way to tell me they're mad, to show me they're mad, to show me that they need to take a break, right? They need some space. Going to give them some coping strategies for when they're mad, what they could do next time. If they said that they thought that these were the crayons like the ones they have at home that you can draw on the walls in the bathtub, then I'm just going to guide them that all crayons are built differently. So you need to ask me about the crayons so I can tell you if these are the kind that are built to wash off or these are the kind that are built to stick forever, right? And then if they said I wanted to draw up and down instead of flat, I'll say, so next time, let me know that. And I'll get a piece of paper for you and we'll put it on the wall. And that way you can still draw on paper with the crayons. So those are just some examples, but that's how the three legs kind of work. And we need to have all of them there for positive discipline to work. All right, so my next picture here is this cow. We're getting complicated, I know. It's a cow behind a fence. What's really important here is the fence. And I'm just going to ask you, why is this fence important for the cow? Why do you think this fence matters for the cow?
Limits.
Limits.
To keep them
Sure.
safe.
Keeps them safe. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that fence really provides a boundary for the cow. I think that fence for that cow represents shelter and safety and limits and boundaries. It's funny, I've got like a little hobby farm at my house and we've got goats. And for a while we had Daisy, the goat, who was just like the bane of my existence because Daisy's main goal in life was to escape the fence and she was good at it. And when Daisy would get over the fence, it's funny because she wouldn't like run away from home. She would actually hang out on the other side of the fence because the fence was where her food was. It was where her friend Jackson the goat was, right? It was still water, shelter, safety, all of those things. And so we're going to talk about boundaries, rules, expectations, and children feel safe and know what to expect within boundaries. They need boundaries, they need rules. Otherwise, if their environment is chaos, they can't possibly regulate themselves because the environment isn't regulated. And so I often give an example if you've ever gone on one of those roller coasters that goes upside down and you know those big things come over your head and shoulders, you know, they come on over and it goes ka-chunk. What do you do when that thing comes over your neck and shoulders? What's the first thing you do if you're on one of those roller coasters? Yep, I can see by your emotions. Yeah. You go like this, right? You test it to make sure it's still there. So are kids going to test the boundaries? Oh yeah, they're testing the boundaries. And they're not thinking, I'm testing the boundary to make sure it's still there. But developmentally, that's exactly what they're doing. They're testing that boundary to say, what is the boundary here? What can I get away with? Is it the same here as it is at home? Is it the same here as it is at school? Right? And there's a sense of safety and security when we know that boundary is in place because now we know our limits. And so I don't get into this a ton here, but I do want to say two of the most important ways you can provide limits for kids is to provide routine. It is so important to have a routine, a system that is pretty consistent every single time that provides that safety and that security and those boundaries for kids. Kids feel safe within routines. They know what to expect. The other thing is to provide kids choices because providing choices is a way of providing some boundaries and also sharing some control and power because kids want power, right? We tell them everything to do. We tell them when they have to get up and what they have to wear and when they're going to eat and what they're going to eat and how they have to behave and when they're allowed to talk and when they're not allowed to talk. And they just want a little bit of power. So if we can provide some choices, those are us defining the boundaries with the choices, and then they get to choose within the choices we've provided. So they get some power, we get some power, right? And this can be really helpful for those times when there isn't a choice. Because sometimes there isn't a choice, and we can say, you know what? Right now, that's not a choice. Sometimes we have choices and sometimes we don't. This is not one of those times. But you can't say that if you never give kids choices. So you want to be really proactive about giving them choices. I want to talk about good rules here also for a minute. So when we are thinking about setting up boundaries and rules and expectations for kids, we have to remember their age. We are going to have different rules for a 2-year-old than a 12-year-old. Like that's just how it is. We have different expectations. We have here few. If you can set up an environment where you don't have to have a gazillion rules, that is much better for everyone involved. It is exhausting to constantly be reminding kids of all the rules. And it is exhausting for kids to constantly have to be reminded of all the rules. So think about your environment and set up an environment so that you don't have to have a ton of rules. Um, One example I think about is when I was teaching in the preschool, um, we had there was this time between when we had like our snack time and our story time. And some kids eat in about 2 seconds and some kids eat in about 20 minutes. So you end up having this weird thing where the kids who are done right away are also the ones who are kind of prone to creating a little bit of chaos. And of course, the more measured children who take 20 minutes to thoughtfully and mindfully eat, are just sitting there at the table and you're like, oh, we just need to get everyone together for some story time right now, right? They're working in different paces. And so what was happening is that the kids who were the quick eaters were running over and finding the puppets. And there was a dinosaur puppet and a big bad wolf puppet. And we would have World War III with the puppets in this moment. I mean, it was, "Rah!" And they're just all attacking each other, and everyone's rolling over on top of each other, and they're running around and going after the kids at the table. And so that's a moment where instead of me, which I did for a while every day, oh, the puppets aren't for attacking other people. The puppets are just to talk to each other. Oh, this isn't really a puppet time. Finally, I was like, Courtney, just get rid of the puppets. This is not, just have the puppets not accessible during this time. Change the environment. So often we have to look at ourselves as adults and say, all right, this time is not working for us. So how can I make a change to either my routine or my environment to make this a more successful time? So just kind of thinking about that. That's how we get to fewer rules. Collaborative, kids are capable of more than we give them credit for. So let them have some input into the rules and the boundaries and the expectations. They have great ideas. So have them give you some input into what those rules and boundaries are. And if they've had some input, they're going to be more invested in following those rules because they helped create the rules. Rules should be simple and say it in kid language, not sentences and sentences, and enforceable. If you can't enforce a rule, just get rid of it. Don't waste your breath. Kids know. They know if you can't enforce a rule. Empty threats. I mean, I have had kids actually, I've had parents say to me that kids will actually say to them, oh, that's, we know that whenever you get mad and you say all that you're not going to do anything anyways. And then the parents are like, oh my goodness, they're right. Right? I can't actually enforce those rules. So make sure it's enforceable. And if you've made a rule, you need to consistently enforce it. So you have to be willing to follow through again, because kids will know if you're just kind of blowing hot air. One of the things I'm just going to mention here really quickly is sometimes we make requests of children of what they need to do, right? Or what we need them to do is actually a better way to say it. And we're trying to be kind. And so we tag the word okay onto the end of our request. So we'll say, it's time for everyone to come over into the circle, okay? The minute you tag okay onto the end of your sentence, you've just given children a choice. And I just want you to be aware of that. That language that we're using to be polite, children here, I have an option here. So if it isn't an option, just say it's time to come to the circle. You can say that kindly. But the minute you say, can you come to the circle? It's time to come to the circle, okay? Just recognize you've just given children a choice. These are some of those when we say, what are the strategies, for kids in a group setting? So much of our strategies are around the language we use versus the messages that kids receive and really being intentional about our language. So why do you think kids are challenging the rules? Why do you think they challenge the rules?
They want to see what their limits are, like where they can go with um, what has been given to them. Like, can I push any further, or can I just break that boundary? Or
Sure, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Any other reasons that you can think of?
For some, I think sometimes their emotions take hold and they either forget about the rule or don't care enough about the consequence to rein in whatever emotions they're feeling.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sometimes they forget. Sometimes they don't even understand the expectation. Um, Yeah, sometimes they don't care about the consequence, which means we need to think about different consequences, maybe. Yeah. Any other reasons that you can think
Kids are
of?
spontaneous. They're just, some of them are just extremely spontaneous and they act without thinking. They have difficulty controlling themselves.
Sure, they're just in the moment, right? And they're not thinking
Yeah,
ahead.
in the moment. That sounds a little nicer, doesn't it?
Yeah,
They're just in
yeah.
the moment and spontaneous and they don't mean to do harm, but oh, there, look, I did it again, you know?
Yep. Absolutely, absolutely. And so, and also, sometimes we just have to go back to the basics. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe they're tired, right? Sometimes there's just some of those physical things. Maybe they just don't, yeah, they don't understand the rules. Maybe they're rewarded for breaking the rules because they get away with it. Maybe they're modeling because maybe others are breaking the rules and getting away with it, or even adults break the rules that they set. And so it's being modeled for them to break the rules. At the very, and I'm not going to do it today, but I'm just going to kind of plant this seed for you. I want you to think about, as you're thinking back on this, think about your driving habits and you breaking the speed limit. You probably know the rule. You probably know the consequence of breaking the speed limit when you're driving. And I'm betting that many of you still break the speed limit sometimes. And just think to yourself, why do I break the speed limit? Because those are all the same reasons why kids break the rules and challenge the rules, are the same reasons that you break the speed limit and you break those rules. They're no different from us in so many ways. So just something to ponder this evening when you're thinking back about your day. All right. So as I'm talking about these positive discipline techniques and very closely watching my clock here, I don't want you to think about purple elephants. Don't think about what would happen if a purple elephant were to walk into your office right now. Don't think about if a purple elephant were to step in here behind me. Don't think about what color of shade of purple the purple elephant would be. Don't think about purple elephants. So what are you maybe thinking about, even just a teeny tiny bit, is maybe purple elephants, because I just won't shut up about it, right? And what I want to talk about here is the language we use with kids, and your language paints a picture in kids' heads. And when we say use our don't language, don't think about purple elephants, not purple elephants. Stop thinking about purple elephants. What do you hear? Purple elephants. And so when we use our don't and stop language with kids, we're painting a picture in their minds of the thing we don't want them to do. And we're not painting a picture in their minds of what we do want them to do. So it can be more effective to use what we call positive language. Tell children what you want them to do and paint that picture in their heads instead of telling them what you don't want to do. So instead of don't run, we say walk. Instead of don't be late, it's be on time. Instead of don't track that mud all through this hallway, it's take your muddy shoes off and wipe them in the mat before you walk in the hallway, right? So it's just a little flip in the script to focus on that guiding piece of telling kids what we want them to do instead of what we don't want them to do. Don't doesn't work. And save your don't and stop language for those emergencies, right? Sometimes kids hear don't all the time and they're just tuning it out. And I tell you, if you can save it for when it's like super serious, right? Stop if they're running out into the street or something like that. I mean, that's actually telling them what you want them to do. Stop. Then it's more effective than if you're always, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, stop doing that, stop doing that. So just thinking about a strategy. All right. I want you on your paper to draw a line with 5 circles on it. Just draw a line with 5 circles on it. Don't overthink. Or picture it in your head if you're not drawing right now. Okay. So, did your picture look like this? You can just like nod your head or give me a thumbs up or okay. How about this one? Anyone? Okay, a couple yeses, a couple no's. Oh, same but horizontal. Look at how we're talking without speaking, just that body language. How about this one? All right, so a few of you had this one too. So here's the thing. If I wanted you to draw that first picture, I would have had to do something differently. I would have had to use more specific language, and I would have had to allow you to ask clarifying questions. I didn't give you an opportunity to tell me what you heard me ask or to ask questions. And I didn't get super specific. So when we're using language with children, we need to be specific and we need to allow them to ask questions to make sure we're checking for understanding. So this is going to summarize a lot of this, right? So when words paint a picture, we talked about that. Being specific, what does cleanup mean? What does cleanup mean? I am guessing your definition of cleanup is different from kids' definition of cleanup. What does be quiet mean? Does be quiet mean no sound at all? Does it mean whisper voices? Like, what does it even mean? Right? So again, your definition of quiet may be different than their definition of quiet. We will be much more effective with kids if we get super specific about what we mean. So cleaning up might be wind the cap down on the glue bottle and put it in the glue bottle bin, right? Rather than just clean up. And be quiet might just be use your inside voice. Or that's stomping your feet, that's really loud. We're gonna keep our feet on the floor, right? Just being super specific about what you mean, giving clear directions one at a time. Sometimes we run through our mental list of what we want kids to do and they can't retain it all. It's like, okay, I'm gonna have you gather your papers, you're gonna go sit over there in the corner, make sure that you put that glue bottle away first and that you're ready to go for when your parent comes and picks you up. They all they hear is my parents coming to pick me up. They hear the last thing you say or they hear the first thing you say. So clear directions one at a time. And then just help kids understand cause and effect. Help them understand how their actions cause some sort of an outcome or reaction. This helps them become more forward thinking. All right, I'm going to go pretty quick here. This picture is of crayons broken in half. And I'm going to have you just ponder, what should the consequences be if you give a child a pack of new crayons and they break them all? What would the consequence be? We're going to talk about consequences. Any ideas on what that consequence should be? Could be, not what should be, what could be.
Taking the crayons away for that time.
Sure, you might remove the crayons for that time. Yeah. Any other ideas?
Those crayons become that child's crayons to use for the remainder of the whatever time period you.
Those are their crayons now, and they're shorter than they used to be. They're drawing with stubby crayons. Yeah, sure. So these are all possibilities. So I quickly want to talk about 3 types of consequences. The first one I want to talk about is an imposed consequence. That's what we want to avoid. So this is a consequence that we give for kids. It's completely unrelated. So that would be, you broke the crayons, and so now you can't have snack today. What does that have to do with anything, right? That's an imposed consequence. That's just us trying to make the child sad. And we want them to be as sad as we are mad. So it's not related, it's not reasonable, and there's no learning happening there. A natural consequence is between the child and their universe. So I drew with the crayons broke, I'm now drawing broken crayons, right? I didn't wear socks with my shoes, I now have a blister. You don't have to do anything. Just don't step in and rescue them as long as they're not unsafe. Just don't step in and rescue them. Let the natural consequence take its course. There's wonderful learning there. The third type of consequence is a logical consequence, and that's where we have to step in. That's where we might say, I'm removing the crayons for the rest of this session today, but tomorrow you'll get a chance to try again. What could you do differently tomorrow? And so here's just what I'm going to say about a logical consequence. I have a few tips for them actually, but I'm going to boil these things down into related, reasonable, and respectful. A consequence should be related to whatever the child did. So if they did something with the crayons, it needs to be about the crayons, right? It should be reasonable. I'm not going to take away the crayons for the rest of the school year, because then how are they ever going to learn how to use crayons, right? We want to make sure, again, if the child is aware of the consequence in advance, and it can be in a general way. If I make a mess, I clean it up. right? If they're aware of the consequence in advance, then they can make a plan for whether or not they're going to break the rule. But if they're not aware of the consequence in advance, then they have no way for making a plan for acting. So having those set up in advance, making sure it's age appropriate. Again, it's a different consequence for a 2-year-old than a 12-year-old. And then just making sure fair, and fairness is part of reasonable. All right, this is a picture of you looking in the mirror. Now we're doing self-portraits. So the idea here is we're going to talk about adults as role models for children. So you get to draw a self-portrait. And I just want to say here that you are setting the tone of the environment for the children in your care. So if you're using a quiet and calm voice and you stay in control, then that's the atmosphere you're setting up in your space. If you are yelling across the room, then that's the atmosphere you're setting up in that space, is a yelling across the room atmosphere. So we want to use respect with children. We want to use empathy. And empathy means I'm connecting with how you are feeling in the moment, even when I don't agree with maybe what you did or why you're feeling that way. Empathy does not indicate agreement. It just shows that you care, you understand and respect. So when even if one child were to hit another child, I can say, wow, I can tell you're really angry right now, right? I can still empathize with how you're feeling, even though it was not okay to hit the other child, right? So empathy says, I see you, I hear you, even if I don't agree with you, and there still is an outcome. So we set that tone through our voice, through our proximity. We can just use our bodies to get closer to children to show I see you and I'm paying attention. And just remember, we have a lot of power that way. So this is talking about that self-reflection, like for being patient. So some things to ask yourself and to reflect on in your self-talk when you're pressing the pause button. Is this just normal behavior for this age? Right? I don't like it, but 10-year-olds tease and taunt, 2-year-olds hit and bite, teenagers activate power struggles. I may not like this behavior, but is this behavior just developmentally normal and typical for this age? That really helps us with our patience. Am I out of patience? Am I tired or hungry? Are they tired or hungry? Can they even do what I ask? Do they know it's wrong? Sometimes we have to also remember, if I stay calm, this has the potential to be a learning experience for this child. Also remembering their behavior, it's not about me. It's about them and where they're at developmentally. They are not intentionally trying to push your buttons, and their behavior is not a reflection of you as a parent or a teacher. It's where they're at developmentally right now on their learning curve. And if you can say to yourself, this is not about me, it's not about me, it's not about me, that can also help you remain patient, because when we take it personally, that's when we get really hot, right? And that's when it really pushes our buttons. And just also remember, getting rid of your should language. So we often are like, they should know better. They shouldn't act that way. You shouldn't have done that. When you get caught up in your should language, you're emotionally resisting what is. The fact is, the permanent marker is the permanent marker, and the permanent marker is now on the wall. That's the situation at hand. And I need to deal with the physical situation. And I can't do that if I'm emotionally resisting with all of my shoulds. They should have known better. They shouldn't have done that. They shouldn't have said that. I was teaching this and I had someone say, yeah, my therapist told me to quit shoulding all over myself, which I thought was very funny. So we need to think about that, right? And also not acting on our assumptions. We often assume we know which child did it. We know who started it. We know what they're going to say next. And when we act on our assumptions, we close off the possibility for curiosity and understanding. We're no longer gathering information because we think we know. And you might know 98% of the time, but 2% of the time you may not know. So try to watch your assumptions as well. All of those are ways to help you be patient. The other thing is, I know this stuff isn't on the slide because we had that question, so I'm trying to honor that question, is to think about making a be choice. So decide how you are going to be whenever it is you do what you do. So if you are about to have a difficult conversation with a child, or if you're about to correct a behavior, make a choice about how you are going to be in this conversation. I am going to be calm. I am going to be firm. Because because we make do choices all the time, but we don't often stop and think, how do I want to be in this conversation? And we pause to do that. It can help us remain more patient and compassionate. So I'm not gonna get into I statements because that's a whole nother lesson, but it's really in watching your you language. Because when you say you, right? What are you doing? Why did you put that there? What did you do to him? You always sounds like an accusation, and kids get defensive. But if we can focus on, I'm concerned when I hear kids talking that way to other children. It makes me sad, right? I feel, saying how you feel can be a way to diffuse a situation and diffuse a child. Never humiliate or shame a child. Be consistent. And remember, it's not about you. So this is my very last slide, and I don't know if any of you remember Dennis Rodman, but he was a basketball player, and he had some pretty bad behaviors, honestly. Um, and so his teammate, Carl Malone, called him out one time. It was like, hey, you can't act like that. You've got kids who are watching you. And he said, they pay me to play basketball. They don't pay me to be a role model. And this is how Carl Malone responded. He said, we don't choose to be role models. We are chosen. Our only choice is whether to be a good role model or a bad one. And I think that holds true for all of us in our role with children. So I always end with this slide here.